Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The Undying Live Forever technique could be cultivated with incredible rapidity as long as enough life force was available. Bai Xiaochun had learned that many years ago. Also, he had come to understand that cultivating it required a huge, almost preposterous expenditure of resources. There was no way the river-defying sect could sustain such a resource drainage, and even the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, one of the river source sects, would be hard-pressed to do so. And as of this moment, he had only reached the third level of the Undying Codex, the Undying Tendons. Later, he would need to work on the Undying Bones and Undying Blood, and could scarcely imagine what level of life force would be required for that. I can't worry about all of that, he thought, his eyes shining with determination as the vortex in his torso sucked in the life force from the nascent soul pill. Almost immediately, his body began to radiate intense heat that began to melt the surrounding ice, and caused his blood to seethe as it surged through his veins. As the heat filled him, he could clearly sense his chi passageways being reformed. As they were, black light filled him, the representation of powerful fleshly body power flowing through his body. As it connected to the power in his four limbs, something like a restrictive spell began to spread out to surround him. Time passed, although Bai Xiaochun couldn't be sure how much. Suddenly, his eyes opened to find that his entire body with the exception of his head was radiating a black light that was painful to look at. Eyes shining, he cast his senses throughout his body, and could immediately tell that his fleshly body power had increased far beyond its previous level. However, that was not the most shocking aspect to the change. He could also sense that his body was much lighter. Or at least, that was what it felt like. As of this moment, he was quite sure that he could move so quickly that he could pierce through the air. Curious, Bai Xiaochun was struck with the desire to test out his theory. However, he suppressed that desire and decided to examine himself a bit further. Suddenly, he gasped. This. To his delight, he realized that he was just on the verge of making contact with the next shackle of mortality. That feeling brightened his spirits immediately. From what he could tell, all it would take would be one more bit of advancement to spread his Undying Live Forever technique to his head. Unfortunately, the life force from the nascent soul pill was already fading away. What a pity, he thought sadly. However, he was still excited. I'm in the great circle of the gold core stage, and made a big breakthrough with my Undying Live Forever technique. As of this point, not a single ordinary core formation cultivator would ever dare to provoke me. Laughing heartily, he rose to his feet. No longer suppressing his desire to pierce through the air, he took a step forward. When he did, the layers of ice in front of him exploded, and Bai Xiaochun vanished. As that happened, the other layers of ice in the area cracked and shattered, and in the blink of an eye, the building was revealed. The effects quickly spread out into the courtyard, and within the space of a few breaths of time, to the entire armory. Cracking sounds filled the air, causing the skin flayers to look around in surprise. Zhao Long and the others from the regiment looked on in shock as the masses of ice, and the mountain that had been the residence, all collapsed. Everything in the armory, from buildings to pill furnaces, all shattered as they transformed into a blast of wind that spread out in all directions. Then, countless gasps rang out as people realized that Bai Xiaochun was nowhere to be seen. The Grand Master is missing? What's going on? Zhao Long, Lu Li, and others from the regiment rushed over to the collapsed residence, and sure enough, Bai Xiaochun was gone. As they began to search for him, something happened on the battlefield outside the Great Wall. Of course, there was no fighting going on at the moment, although the landscape was shattered and there were corpses everywhere. That was how the area outside the Great Wall usually looked, like a scene from the underworld. Occasionally, various wildlands animals that enjoyed feasting on carrion could be seen munching on severed limbs and crunching on other parts of the corpses. Suddenly, ripples spread out into the air, after which a black glow appeared, which seemed to take the shape of a magical symbol. The carrion-eating animals were startled, and many shot off in the opposite direction, not daring to get close to the black glow. At the same time, the cultivators on duty atop the Great Wall also noticed what was happening. Some of the magical cannons even began to warm up, as if they were about to unleash attacks. The ripples outside of the wall eventually formed into the shape of a bubble, which popped, after which a figure staggered out. Killing intent appeared in the eyes of the cultivators on the wall, and they were about to attack when suddenly, some of them began to call out in surprise. Grandmaster Bai, it's Bai Xiaochun. Gasps could be heard as the cultivators realized who it was they were looking at, and yet were unable to reconcile his sudden appearance on the battlefield. The person down there was definitely none other than Bai Xiaochun. At first, he glanced around in confusion. When he finally realized where he was, his scalp began to prickle in fear. What am I doing here? Instantly, his anxiety mounted as he thought about what would happen if a group of soul cultivators suddenly showed up. Without any hesitation, he began to speed back toward the Great Wall. Let me in, he cried as he flew along. Seeing that the cultivators on the Great Wall were hesitating, he quickly pulled out his identity medallion to prove who he was. With that, he passed through the shield and landed on the wall itself. The cultivators still seemed a bit suspicious though, and began to ask some questions. Grandmaster Bai, what were you doing out there? We didn't see anyone go out beyond the wall. You're supposed to get permission from a general before doing that. An accident, that's all, Bai Xiaochun said, clearing his throat. Just a little accident. Now that he was back inside the protection of the Great Wall, his heart began to calm down. Earlier, he had been attempting to test out his ability to pierce through the air, and hadn't been expecting to suddenly step into a void of darkness. Within that void, he felt like his body was collapsing and, terrified, had struggled to emerge. When he did, he was dropped onto the battlefield outside of the Great Wall. The mere thought of what had just occurred left his heart pounding with residual terror. After offering some more vague explanations, he hurried back to the city. Way too dangerous, he thought. I definitely can't take risks like that anymore. Despite his lingering fear, though, he had to admit that what he had just done was extraordinary. He had actually pierced through the Great Wall and its spell formation shield with something almost like a minor teleportation. Or maybe that's not it. After all, outside of battle situations, the huge eye will prevent cultivators from the 5 legions from leaving the shield without orders. And of course, they can't get back in without an identity medallion. And yet, I definitely managed to get out. Why? He blinked a few times, and after a moment, couldn't help but feel that what he had done just now felt like a strange manifestation of his undying tendons. Don't tell me it's the Undying Hex? Maybe it can affect or even bypass other restrictive spells? Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun considered doing some more tests. However, the sensation of almost being ripped apart in that void was something he couldn't stop thinking about. No, it's too dangerous. If I want to do some more tests, I'll have to wait until my undying tendons are complete, and I've broken through the next shackle. Shaking his head, he finally got back to the armory. That was when Zhao Long and the rest of the regiment finally found him. Zhao Long immediately breathed a sigh of relief. The members of his regiment felt more than ever that Bai Xiaochun was a mysterious and enigmatic figure, and were shocked that he had been able to vanish despite all of them being present to stand guard. Congratulations on your breakthrough, Grandmaster. Grandmaster, do you want us to start rebuilding things? As of this point, the armory was uninhabitable, but as a colonel in the Skinflayers, he had his own command center. Therefore, he simply waved his hand and said, "We're done with this place for now. Let's go to my command center." Great Wall City was divided up into east, west, south, north, and central districts, one for each of the 5 legions. The Skinflayers occupied the east district, which was further divided up into 10 garrisons, one for each of the major generals. The major generals were all nascent soul experts, people who had climbed mountains of corpses and swam through seas of blood to get to their current position. Their murderous auras and battle prowess vastly exceeded those of others in their same cultivation level. Without illustrious service performed for the army, and also powerful backers, it was virtually impossible to become a major general. As for the garrisons, they were divided into 10 command centers, which belonged to the 10 colonels who led them. As for the lieutenants and captains, they occupied locations within the command centers of the colonels. Bai Xiaochun's command center was in the garrison belonging to Major General Zhou Xingjun of the 3rd Corps, right next to Li Hongming's command center. After Bai Xiaochun was promoted to colonel, Major General Zhou Xingjun had almost immediately arranged for troops to be assigned to him. Clearly, the army cared a lot about Bai Xiaochun, because all of those cultivators came from the group of 10,000 that he had personally rescued off of the battlefield. Originally, they had been members of other parts of the army, but had been specifically reassigned by General Bai Lin. The entire group of cultivators felt incredible gratitude toward Bai Xiaochun, and had personally witnessed his ferocity and madness in the heat of battle. As such, they were fully convinced of his abilities, and were very excited to serve in his regiment. As Bai Xiaochun was making his way over to the command center, some of the cultivators of the regiment were drilling on the parade ground, practicing the use of various divine abilities, their faces expressionless. Others were sparring amongst themselves. Although everyone appeared to be completely ferocious, they all maintained careful control at all times. The majority sat cross-legged, meditating in silence. The entire command center seemed filled with a very somber air and a weighty pressure that would make any outsider hesitant to enter it. The place had been like this ever since Bai Xiaochun was promoted to colonel, and in fact, the troops under the command of the other colonels all trembled in fear when they passed by it. Suddenly, a beam of light appeared in the sky which shot down toward the command center. Immediately, all the soldiers inside looked up with cold eyes. Within the beam of light was a middle-aged man with a somber expression and pulsing veins of steel. The exalted colonel is coming. As soon as the words left his mouth, the cultivators in the command center trembled with excitement. Immediately, the captains began to shout out orders. Get into formation. Soon, the entire place was buzzing. When Bai Xiaochun finally arrived, he saw many familiar faces lined up outside the command center. As soon as the group caught sight of him, they stepped forward a pace and then shouted out in a mighty voice, "Greetings, Colonel." Their words echoed like thunder to fill the entire Third Corps. As for Li Hongming and the other colonels, they were shaken, and quite a few of them rushed out of their own command centers to see what was happening. What they saw was the assembled cultivators of Bai Xiaochun's regiment, pulsing with tenacity, as if their very bones were filled with the desire to do battle. It was as if all Bai Xiaochun had to do was say the word, and they would raze any area to the ground in a blaze of destruction. Li Hongming and the other colonels were deeply shaken. Valiant troops and a gallant officer. Not only are they grateful to Bai Xiaochun, but they also personally witnessed his veins of steel and vicious fighting. Therefore, they truly respect and admire him. Because of their zealous devotion to him, until the day comes that they pay back the kindness he has shown, they might as well be his personal army. This was Bai Xiaochun's first time visiting his command center and seeing all the cultivators he recognized from that fateful battle. Now that he could sense how heroic and dauntless they were, it got his own blood pumping a bit faster. All of a sudden, he found himself thinking about how he had faced countless dangers that day during the war. After a long moment, he took a breath as a feeling of profound emotion filled him. After all, he knew that, while he had saved them, they had also saved him. The looks of reverence and awe with which they gazed at him caused his heart to tremble. Without any hesitation, he waved his hand toward the command center and said, "Come on men, let's drink and eat together. What battle credit we earn, we spend together, and when we have to flee for our lives, we do it shoulder to shoulder." Bai Xiaochun felt that his words were particularly domineering, and when the cultivators under his command heard them, they exchanged amused glances, then clasped hands and shouted, "Sir, yes sir." As their voices resonated through the area, Li Hongming and the other colonels exchanged odd glances. They had seen quite a few commanding officers give speeches to encourage their troops, but had never heard anyone say things as directly as Bai Xiaochun had. Some distance away in the Skin Flayers district was an enormous building that looked like a coffin, within which Bai Lin stood looking in Bai Xiaochun's direction, shaking his head and smiling. 10 armor-clad individuals stood near him, most of them middle-aged, but some older. Moments ago, the group had been discussing business relating to the Skin Flayers, but after the scene which had just played out, they had sent their divine sense over to observe, and now, all of them seemed to be reminiscing about the past. "This Bai Xiaochun sure is candid," Bai Lin said with a chuckle. "I can't believe he just said that they would flee from battle shoulder to shoulder." He turned to look at one of the group of 10, an old man with white hair. "Brother Joe, Bai Xiaochun is very important to the Skin Flayers. Please make sure to take special care of him." The 10 men surrounding Bai Lin were none other than the 10 major generals of the Skin Flayers. As for the white-haired old man, he was Bai Xiaochun's commanding officer, Major General Zhou Xingjun of the Third Corps. Upon hearing Bai Lin's words, he smiled and nodded his head. "Don't worry, General. I'll make sure to keep Grandmaster Bai safe and sound." Bai Lin nodded in response, then looked away from the scene outside and resumed his discussion with the major generals. Meanwhile, the members of Bai Xiaochun's regiment clustered around him as he headed into the command center. Once inside, he looked around at what was to be his new residence. As for Zhao Long and his original squad, they were now Bai Xiaochun's personal guard, and they quickly made strict rules regarding who was allowed into the command center. Without express orders, no one from outside the regiment could gain entrance. After all, not only was Bai Xiaochun a colonel, but he was also on the Wildlands execution list, and in the top 10 at that. The reward on his head was a diva beast soul, something that would be lucrative to wildlanders and cultivators alike. In fact, in the past, there had been situations in which people on the execution list were killed by cultivators, not wildlanders. Before long, half a year had gone by. By now, Bai Xiaochun had been serving at the Great Wall for 2 years. After his promotion to colonel, fighting went on as usual beyond the wall, but they were all skirmishes that didn't come close to the scale of the huge battle the year before. Bai Xiaochun was now very familiar with life in Great Wall City, and had taken up a new hobby. Every few days, he would don his colonel's armor and strut out of his command center, surrounded by large numbers of his men, to stroll through the city. He very much enjoyed the looks of awe and envy that people cast in his direction when he appeared in public. In fact, it was something he would never grow tired of. At first, Zhao Long and his original squad found this very odd, as did the other cultivators in the regiment. However, they gradually grew used to it, and realized that this was just Bai Xiaochun's personality. Although it was a bit embarrassing, it gradually became nothing out of the ordinary. However, Bai Xiaochun continued to do it so often that he appeared to be neglecting his day-to-day duties. It reached the point where Bai Lin caught wind of it. Annoyed, he made some special arrangements. The next day, when Bai Xiaochun led his regiment out of the command center to enjoy the gazes of the other cultivators in the army, he had just begun to savor the buzz of conversation around him when all of a sudden, a group of several thousand cultivators appeared, all of them wearing suits of armor. As they proceeded along, they cleared a 300-meter path through the crowds in front of them. Not even Bai Xiaochun was exempt, and was forced off to the side. "What are you people doing?" he complained. Without any hesitation, the cultivator in question flashed a command medallion which was emblazoned with the surname Nian, as well as the sigil of the Skin Flayers. "Major General Nian Harong is coming through. Back up, all of you." Within the 5 legions, the only people who had command medallions with their surnames on them were the major generals. As soon as the command medallion appeared, the cultivator didn't need to say anything else. With the wave of his hand, the thousands of cultivators under his command began to drive Bai Xiaochun and the others backward. Bai Xiaochun wasn't too happy about that, but there was little he could do about. All he could do was watch as the nearly 10,000 cultivators cleared a path through the area. Moments later, a dazzling sight appeared not too far off in the distance. It was an old man in a crimson suit of armor, flanked by 10 colonels, all of whom had respectful expression on their faces. Everyone who had been cleared out of the 300-meter path began to cheer and cry out fervently, in a way that vastly surpassed how they had reacted when they saw Bai Xiaochun. The drone of their enthusiasm instantly bore deep into Bai Xiaochun's ears. "It's a major general, heavens! You hardly ever see the major generals walking around. The major generals of Great Wall City can shake all creation. They're the kind of people who cause the lands to tremble wherever they go." Bai Xiaochun could merely gape in astonishment at the ostentatious and domineering scene which was playing out in front of him. At the same time, he felt a bit downhearted. What's so amazing about him? He thought. He's just a major general, right? Then he gritted his teeth. I have to become a major general. Bai Xiaochun had left in the highest of spirits, and came back feeling like he was at the bottom of the barrel. After returning to his command center, he thought back to the sight of the Major General's procession, and felt very irritated. Major General, he thought, gritting his teeth. Then he considered how the Major General had walked along with an escort of 10 colonels, while he himself was only a colonel. I can't settle for this. I have to become a Major General. With that, his eyes began to shine with determination. Over the course of the past half-year, he had spent almost no time on cultivation, nor had he done any pill concocting. Most of his time had been spent enjoying the perks of being a colonel. However, as of this moment, he had received a sharp reminder that being a colonel was not the end of the line for him. Now that the idea of being a major general was stirring in his mind, he thought back to how Bai Lin had encouraged him to work hard to get promoted. If I retire as a major general, he murmured, then when I get back to the sect, I'll be an elder in the Hall of Steel Veins. Realizing that he didn't have all of the information he needed, he decided to go out and make some inquiries. The truth was that such matters were not secret within the 5 legions, and were in fact quite well known. It only took a bit of asking around for Bai Xiaochun to get all of the information he was looking for. Elders in the Hall of Steel Veins had a position far above ordinary elders. In fact, they were on a level that put them only slightly below the sect leader, a fact which left Bai Xiaochun gasping and deeply moved. How is that even possible? This is the sect leader of the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect we're talking about. He's only in the nascent soul stage, but he's still in a very high position. And elders in the Hall of Steel Veins are just below that. Bai Xiaochun almost couldn't believe it at first, but after further inquiries, he came to understand why it was the case. The 5 legions operate beyond the control of the sect leader. Even the diva stationed at the Great Wall is only here to oversee things. The only person who directly controls the 5 legions is the demigod patriarch. The reason the Hall of Steel Veins is so powerful is because it only follows his orders. Bai Xiaochun was both flabbergasted and also palpitating with eagerness. If he could somehow manage to become a major general, then when his commission was up and he went back to the sect, he could get a set of 5 elements diva beast souls and step into the nascent soul stage. Furthermore, he could also become an elder in the Hall of Steel Veins. When that happened, he would have a very high position, higher than ordinary elders in the sect. Not only would that be a big help to the river-defying sect, but it would also be immensely beneficial on a personal level. The mere idea left his heart burning with anticipation, to the point where his eyes sparkled with the light of countless stars. I absolutely have to become a major general, he said, slapping his thigh. Now that he had set his goal, though, it immediately led to new anxiety. After all, he had already calculated how much battle credit it would take to become a major general, which was more than 100 times the amount he had earned in that huge battle. In the better part of a year which had passed since then, no major battles had even occurred. More than a month went by, and he only got more depressed. Eventually, he climbed to the top of the Great Wall and looked out toward the wildlands. Unfortunately, all he could do was wish that their huge army would come back. "Why aren't they attacking?" he said as he stood there sighing. "Damn it, I don't have much time to work with, only 7 or 8 more years. What am I supposed to do? I guess the savages and soul cultivators are just too scared, and don't dare to come over and fight." The other cultivators noticed how he was acting, and heard his constant sighing. Soon, they began to exchange awkward glances. As far as they were concerned, it was a good thing that the wildlands savages hadn't attacked in full force. However, Bai Xiaochun didn't seem to think so, which they found very strange. Of course, the sight of him acting in such a way led some of them sigh inwardly and muse, "Why aren't they attacking? Isn't it because of you? If it weren't for you and your special methods, they would be doing things the way they usually did, and attacking several times per month." Bai Xiaochun waited a bit longer, and yet there was no change. Every day that went by, he continued to try to think of a solution to the problem, until his eyes were bloodshot. Finally, he decided that he had to do something to speed things up. "Fine, if the savages insist on being so uncooperative, then I'll just have to think of a new way to earn battle credit. I absolutely have to become a major general." With that, he headed toward the huge pagoda in the middle of the city. From what he remembered last time he had gone to exchange battle credit, the 5 legions had an execution list just like the wildlands did. Taking the heads of some of the people on that list came with hefty rewards. Now that I'm a colonel, I have lots of powerful experts under my command. I refuse to believe that I can't earn some battle credit with their help. It didn't take Bai Xiaochun very long to reach the central district, and the base of the tower, where quite a group of cultivators was gathered. When they caught sight of him, they gave him solemn nods of greeting. Bai Xiaochun looked up at the eye at the top of the tower, then pulled out his identity medallion and sent some spiritual sense into it to begin browsing the execution list. The first thing that jumped out to him was the first name on the list. As soon as he saw it, his eyes went wide. Mistress Red Dust. Mistress Red Dust's information was clearly listed there in first place on the list. She had a Diva Realm cultivation base, and was a ruthless fighter who was cold and cruel to the bone. In fact, there was even a reminder that, because she was a diva, it was best to avoid her at all costs. The number of cultivators she had killed since she made her debut was shocking to behold, including many nascent soul cultivators. Most shocking of all was that she hadn't even been practicing cultivation for 200 years. To become a diva so quickly seemed almost impossible to Bai Xiaochun, especially considering how impoverished the wildlands were. There was no energy of heaven and earth there, only soul power. And yet, despite being in those conditions, this Mistress Red Dust had managed to set a heaven-defying pace in her cultivation. "I remember Mistress Red Dust," Bai Xiaochun murmured. As soon as he focused on her name, a picture appeared in his mind. It depicted a young woman, more beautiful than Chen Manyao, wearing red garments that accentuated her good looks, and yet made her seem very dangerous. Her murderous aura was shocking to the extreme, even though it was just a picture. Bai Xiaochun remembered seeing her in the flesh during the battle outside the Great Wall. She had been in the middle of fighting Chen Hichan when she had actually made a move to try to kill Bai Xiaochun. Of course, anyone who looked at Mistress Red Dust's name on the list would see the same image Bai Xiaochun was seeing. She was a spectacular figure, who had a reward on her head so high that it was astonishing to behold. Anyone who killed her would be promoted to general. If there were no generals who needed to be replaced, then a new legion would be created. That was a reward that surpassed even Bai Xiaochun's ideal of becoming a major general. As soon as he saw that reward, his eyes burned with passion and envy. However, it also caused him to purse his lips. So stupid. The only person who could take that shrew out is a diva, and why would a diva want to be a general in the army? Bai Xiaochun shook his head. If he was good enough to take out a diva, then he wouldn't be sitting around at the Great Wall. He would definitely be back in the river-defying sect already. Besides, when it came to devas, they weren't the type of people he would ever be willing to offend. Sighing, he went on to look at the second name on the list, which also belonged to a diva, who went by the Taoist name Wakening Insects. The number of merit points offered up for his death was shocking, to say the least. Astonished, Bai Xiaochun continued to go down the list. Soon, he began to frown as he realized that all the names in the top 30 were those of nascent soul stage necromancers. Although some of the names at the bottom of the list were core formation cultivators, the battle credit reward for them wasn't very high. After a few calculations, Bai Xiaochun found that he would have to kill everyone from 30th place all the way down into the 200s to earn enough battle credit to become a major general. What am I supposed to do, then? He thought, sighing. Obviously, he had to give up on the idea of killing people on the execution list. It was simply too dangerous of an undertaking. However, the thought of the honor, glory, and benefits that came with being a major general were something he just couldn't give up on. There had to be a way to get more battle credit. What a headache, he thought. How am I supposed to pull something like this off when the only thing I'm good at is concocting pills? Wait a second, that's not right. There is something I'm good at. Stopping in place, he thought back to his time hanging out with Zhao Tianzhao, and how he had called himself a love saint. Suddenly, his heart began to pound. Looking back at the execution list, he blinked a few times, feeling a bit torn. Don't tell me that in order to become a major general, I'm going to have to rely on my sex appeal to seduce Mistress Red Dust. The mere thought left him grieving in indignation. That was especially true considering that she was so much older than him. Although she was pretty, who knew what kind of eccentricities she had? The more he thought about it, the more that plan seemed like a huge sacrifice. Not worth it, he thought, feeling more crestfallen than ever. With that, he abandoned the idea. Quick note about Mistress Red Dust's name. First of all, this is a Taoist name, not her real name. That fact is not confirmed until later in the novel, but it seems pretty obvious from the get-go. It's a hard name to pin down how to translate. There are different ways to interpret it, but I'm going with the way the term is used in Buddhist philosophy. The red dust is a metaphor referring to the world of mortals or human society. In terms of why she would have such a name, there is no explanation provided at this point, so you will have to contemplate that on your own. Could it be that the heavens are jealous of me, Bai Xiaochun? Have I been doomed to never become a major general? Feeling overwhelmed by sorrow, he clasped his hands behind his back and looked up into the sky. After a long moment, he sighed and turned to leave the pagoda. However, in that very moment, one of the cultivators nearby opened his bag of holding and produced a collection of vengeful souls. Bags of holding couldn't be used to hold vengeful souls for long periods of time, and in fact, these souls were already starting to grow dim. As soon as they flew out into the open, a gravitational force sprang out from the huge eye. In the briefest of moments, the souls were sucked up, which seemed to enliven the huge eye. Bai Xiaochun suddenly stopped in place, his eyes growing wide. Clearly, after turning in all of the vengeful souls, the cultivator from just now had been given some battle credit. Instantly, Bai Xiaochun's spirits lifted. Eyes shining brightly, he slapped his thigh. Of course, how could I have forgotten? You can turn in souls to get battle credit. In fact, as long as you keep turning in souls, your battle credit will continue to climb. However, only a moment after getting excited, he suddenly felt even more down than before. That won't work either. After all, there wasn't very much fighting going on lately, which meant that there were very few souls on the battlefield. He was extremely adept at taking care of souls, but had nowhere to exercise his talents. Sighing, he trudged away. After returning to his command center, he sat there in frustration, mulling the matter over from different angles. In the end, he could only think of one solution. If he wanted to get more souls, he would need to leave the Great Wall and go out into the wildlands to search for them himself. No way, I can't do that. It's too dangerous. There's no way I'm going to openly court death. Sighing, he gave up on the idea. No longer in the mood to go strolling about outside the command center, he decided to focus on cultivating his Undying Live Forever technique. The third level of the Undying Live Forever technique was the Undying Tendons. All he had to do was cultivate that part of the technique using his head, and he would be finished. At the moment, he had plenty of medicinal plants that he could use to make medicinal pills, and yet, he knew that the head was different from the limbs and torso. Therefore, he went about his cultivation cautiously. After a bit of work, he was able to confirm that there was indeed some danger in cultivating the undying tendons in his head. Therefore, he pondered the matter for quite some time before proceeding. Before long, half a year had gone by. In a few more months, Bai Xiaochun would reach the 3-year mark at the Great Wall. As the months passed, there were a few battles here and there. Every time a battle came along, Bai Xiaochun would get very excited. Although he wouldn't personally participate, his subordinates would fight, and as a result, he would get some vengeful souls and battle credit. However, he was still a very long way away from becoming a major general. When he was only 2 months away from the 3-year mark, he was meditating in his command center, working on his Undying Live Forever technique, when he realized that he was 50% finished with the undying tendons in his head. However, it was at that point that he began to slow down with his cultivation. It was definitely dangerous to work on the undying tendons in the head, and he had almost fallen into deadly crises on multiple occasions. One day, he suddenly realized that something was glowing red inside his bag of holding. Surprised, he opened his eyes from his meditation and looked down. What's going on? He thought curiously. As soon as he opened his bag of holding, dazzling red light spilled out, light that was coming from his identity medallion. It's glowing, he thought. This was the same medallion he had received upon debarking the huge ship years ago. He remembered being told to never lose it or allow it to be damaged, lest he be incapable of going into and out of the Great Wall. Furthermore, it was also his ticket back to the sect. He had never forgotten those warnings. Afterward, he had even performed a few experiments, and had confirmed that the medallion was made in some fashion that made it impossible for him to affect it in any way. Now, that very same identity medallion was shining with blinding red light. If that were all there were to the situation, it might not have been a big deal. But to Bai Xiaochun's astonishment and anxiety, he found that the jade medallion was emanating the fluctuations of imminent self-detonation. What's happening? He thought, leaping to his feet, his face falling. Not daring to be hesitant, he cast some divine sense into the medallion, whereupon a message appeared in his mind. You have only 2 months until the deadline to complete your first mission. If there is no record of you leaving the Great Wall within that time, this jade medallion will self-destruct. Bai Xiaochun's jaw dropped, and his eyes went wide. After sending more divine sense into the medallion to confirm that he had received the message correctly, he began to drip with sweat. Damn it, I knew I had to go on 3 missions during the 10-year trial, but this is the first time I've heard about having to do one within the first 3 years. His anxiety immediately began to grow as he thought of the prospect of the medallion being destroyed, and being unable to return to the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. This is blackmail, he fumed. The truth was that he wasn't the only one in this position. There were other chosen who hadn't gone on any missions during their first 3 years, who were now similarly staring at their brightly glowing identity medallions. Clearly, the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect had prepared methods to deal with any lazy disciples who neglected to go on missions. Racked with anxiety, Bai Xiaochun flew out of his command center to find Bai Lin. Considering his current rank, he didn't have to make any special requests to see the general, and was soon right in front of him. General, save me, he cried piteously. Bai Lin had been meditating, but as soon as he heard Bai Xiaochun's words, he opened his eyes. Before he could even ask about the situation, Bai Xiaochun held the glowing red medallion aloft and explained. When he was done, he stood there staring at Bai Lin with wide eyes with a look that said, I'm your subordinate, you have to help me. Most of Bai Lin's subordinates were lifetime devotees of the 5 legions, who had enlisted directly into the Hall of Steel Veins. As such, he wasn't very familiar with the rules and regulations regarding the chosen who were out on trials by fire. Furthermore, were it not for the fact that Bai Xiaochun had put on such a spectacular performance when he had first arrived, Bai Lin would never have conscripted him. All right, calm down, Bai Lin said. Pulling out a jade slip, he sent out a few messages of inquiry. After receiving the information he needed, he slowly looked back up at Bai Xiaochun. Nervous, Bai Xiaochun said, General, I'm a colonel. It won't really be a big deal if the medallion self-destructs, will it? You are indeed a colonel in the Skinflayers, Bai Lin replied, but you were conscripted. If you were a major general it might be a different story, but you still have to follow the rules of the sect. I should have thought of this myself, but don't worry, I'll help you resolve the situation. This was Bai Lin's first time seeing Bai Xiaochun in such a state, so he smiled and immediately started to call upon his network of contacts to try to solve the problem. When Bai Xiaochun saw that Bai Lin was starting to transmit a large number of messages through his jade slip, and remembered how he had an important background, he started to calm down. However, after a bit of time passed, a frown appeared on Bai Lin's face. Bai Xiaochun's heart immediately began to pound. After enough time passed for half an incense stick to burn, an unsightly expression could be seen on Bai Lin's face. Putting away the jade slip, he hesitated for a moment and then said, HMPH. Those people back at the sect are complete Philistines. Not flexible at all. Bai Xiaochun, I can reduce your mission requirement from 3 to 1. But you'll still have to go out at least once. Take some time to think about it. After all, it's only one mission, right? Bai Lin was actually feeling a bit embarrassed. He really had tried to help Bai Xiaochun out, but had made so many special requests of the sect in recent years that it made things difficult. As for the elder in charge of the missions, he simply wouldn't budge. Unfortunately, there was nothing more Bai Lin could do other than offer Bai Xiaochun a bit of comfort. Bai Xiaochun felt like crying, but could tell that Bai Lin had already done all he could by reducing the mission requirement down to 1. General, I'm in the top 10 of the Wildlands execution list. The people out there hate me to death. They'll kill me as soon as they see me. I don't dare to go beyond the wall. Bai Lin cleared his throat. Don't worry. Look, just put on a disguise. Go out, finish a mission, and get back as soon as possible. Nobody will even notice that you left. Only the two of us will be in on the secret. Besides, although the sect won't budge on the mission issue, there are other ways I can help. For example, the rule says you have to go on a mission, which means that Great Wall missions also count. Since you're a colonel, I hereby give you the authority to post your own missions. Just make a mission for yourself, and go accomplish it. Simple. All you have to do is make sure that it's a mission suitable for the Gold Core stage. After all, the true spirit in the Eye of the Pagoda is responsible for declaring missions officially complete. I can post my own missions, and go on one of those. Bai Xiaochun's eyes lit up. Laughing heartily, he clasped hands in salute and then left. At one's darkest hour, a glimmer of hope always appears. Bai Xiaochun hurried back excitedly to his command center, his mind abuzz with ideas. As soon as he got back, he had Zhao Long bring him a map of the area outside the Great Wall. After studying the map for a while, he pointed at a little valley barely 5 kilometers away. That's the place. Looking a bit surprised, Zhao Long peered down at the valley, which seemed ordinary in every aspect, and was generally a place devoid of signs of life. In fact, he couldn't think of any reason why Bai Xiaochun would be pointing it out. Colonel, what's so special about that valley? Zhao Long asked. Waving his hand in a grand fashion, Bai Xiaochun replied, according to the intelligence reports I have at my disposal, there's an early nascent soul stage soulhorn deer that lives in that valley. Anyone who can kill that creature and turn in its soulhorn will receive a battle credit reward. Go post the mission immediately. Huh? Zhao Long said, confused. Soulhorn deer were native to the wildlands. Not only were their horns valuable ingredients for medicines, but they could also be used as the primary component to make soulhorn bows. However, soulhorn deer usually gathered in locations where there were a lot of vengeful souls. Considering that the valley in question was only about 5 kilometers away from the Great Wall, there definitely weren't any souls there, which mean that it would be impossible to find a soulhorn deer in the same location. Besides, battles were constantly being fought near the Great Wall, so even if a soulhorn deer happened to end up in the valley, it would quickly flee. After all, soulhorn deer weren't stupid, and definitely wouldn't choose a dangerous place like the Great Wall to settle down. Most importantly, early nascent soul stage soulhorn deer were almost never found outside of the depths of the wildlands. After a brief moment of confused hesitation, Zhao Long looked over at Bai Xiaochun and said, Colonel, are you sure there's a soulhorn deer there? Also, major generals are the only ones who have the right to post missions. Look, if I say there's a soulhorn deer there, then there is. Just put the mission briefing together and send it to the general. Bai Xiaochun waved his hand dismissively. Zhao Long smiled stiffly, clasped hands, and asked, very well, sir. How many battle credits is the reward? Bai Xiaochun cleared his throat and then said, well, it's a very dangerous mission that will be filled with countless dangers. The chances of making it back alive would be small. I guess the only option will be to post a handsome reward. Very well. Set it at 100 million battle credits. Zhao Long's jaw dropped, and he gasped loudly. However, it only took a moment before he realized what was going on, whereupon a strange look appeared in his eye. Oh right, Bai Xiaochun said, giving Zhao Long a very serious look, don't forget to remind the general to let me know just before he posts the mission. We definitely can't have anyone else snatching it up. Zhao Long gave another stiff smile, nodded, then hurried away. As he went along, he couldn't help but envy Bai Xiaochun's ability to embezzle so brazenly. Soon, he reached Bai Lin, where he reported in officially and then handed over the mission briefing. When Bai Lin took the jade slip and looked at it closely, then saw that the reward was 100 million battle credits, his eyes went wide and he almost threw the jade slip on the ground. This is highway robbery. If he wants battle credits, that's fine, but he can't be so obvious about it. A soulhorn deer in valley 5 kilometers away, and at the early nascent soul stage? And then he has the nerve to put a reward of 100 million battle credits. Bai Lin wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. However, considering that he hadn't been able to convince the sect to exempt Bai Xiaochun from mission duty, he couldn't simply refuse to post the mission. After a bit of thought, he reduced the reward from 100 million to 1 million, then sent it to the pagoda in the center of the city. Even a reward of 1 million was still significant, and would be enough for an ordinary soldier to get a promotion to captain. The brat's getting a lucky break this time. Bai Lin posted the mission a bit begrudgingly. After all, since it was a skinflayer's mission, which meant that the reward would come from the skinflayer's coffers. Nonetheless, he posted the mission, sending a message to Bai Xiaochun right before it went public. As soon as the mission appeared in the listings at the pagoda, it was noticed, causing quite a commotion to break out. A mission for 1 million battle credits. Heavens. Quick, get it. What mission is that? It's in valley 5 kilometers away? An early nascent soul stage soulhorn deer? How is that even possible? I want that mission. All of the cultivators who saw the mission instantly tried to do everything they could to be the ones to get their hands on it. However, none of them were a match for Bai Xiaochun. He had been waiting for the mission to be posted, and had also received advanced notice from Bai Lin. Almost as soon as the mission showed up, he accepted it, and then swaggered away under the envious gazes of those around him. Trying to steal my mission, huh? He thought. I was the one who made the mission. Even if you got it, you still wouldn't find a soulhorn deer in that valley. Feeling very pleased with himself, he peeked into his bag of holding, where he happened to have some soulhorns that he had requested as ingredients for concocting soul convergence pills. One of them was clearly from an early nascent soul stage soulhorn deer. All I have to do is go over to that valley with my identity medallion in hand, then come back and turn in the mission. It was quite a stimulating feeling to be able to utilize one's power and connections to be able to earn battle credits in such an open and above-board way. However, despite feeling so pleased with how things were going, he was still very cautious about going outside of the Great Wall. After much thought, he decided that he definitely couldn't take any risks. Even though it's only 5 kilometers away, I can't just casually head over by myself. I definitely need to bring some people with me. He was absolutely convinced that this would be the best course of action, although he wasn't sure if it made sense to bring his entire 1,000-man regiment along. On the other hand, bringing too few people would be too dangerous. In the end, he gritted his teeth and murmured to himself, I don't care about how it looks. Safety is the priority. I'm bringing all 1,000 of them with me. Having made his decision, he quickly passed down orders to his subordinates, making it clear that they weren't to spread word of the matter. None of them questioned Bai Xiaochun or what he was doing. He was their colonel, and had also saved all of their lives. Therefore, all Bai Xiaochun had to do was point in a direction, and they would fight with bloodthirsty ferocity. It also helped that Bai Xiaochun had always treated them fairly. He had even spent his own battle credits to equip them with plenty of armor and magical items. He had also passed out a lot of medicinal pills that he himself had concocted. As a result, his regiment was better equipped and prepared for battle than most others in the legions. After a few days of preparation, it came time to go out on the mission. That night, the moon wasn't very bright, and the lands were blanketed in darkness. The regiment dressed in disguises to make their passage outside the Great Wall easier, and then prepared to leave. Everyone in the regiment had been stationed at the Great Wall for years, and were very familiar with how soul cultivators operated. Furthermore, they were all acquainted with the lands bordering Great Wall City. By disguising themselves as soul cultivators, complete with a few vengeful souls on display, they would definitely be less noticeable on the outside. The only way their disguises would be pierced would be if some extremely powerful expert came along, or if they were forced to use a divine ability that required spiritual power. After all, there was little fundamental difference between ordinary cultivators and soul cultivators. The main distinction was that the former used spiritual energy, while the latter used soul power. The 1,000 members of the regiment didn't go out in battle formation. Rather, they scattered and headed out one by one. However, all it would take would be a single word from Bai Xiaochun, and they would all group back together. After making all the arrangements for his subordinates, Bai Xiaochun nervously put on his own disguise, then gritted his teeth and went out beyond the wall. Outside, he reached up to feel his face, and realized that he still didn't feel at ease. Therefore, he patted his bag of holding to produce a large bucket of water, which was full to the brim with heavenspan river water. Inside of that water was a semi-transparent mask made from flesh, the very same mask he had acquired from imposter Nightcrypt. That mask could change one's appearance and aura, and even the fluctuations of one's life force. There are some mysterious things about this mask, but at the moment, I absolutely have to hide my appearance and aura. I need to seize the moment. Go to the valley, come back, and then everything will be over. Besides, it's not like I'm going to run into some wildlands army in a little valley 5 kilometers from the Great Wall. Things shouldn't be too dangerous. With that, he took the mask out of the heavenspan river water and put it onto his face. Instantly, his appearance changed. No longer was he a young man, but instead, a sallow-faced, middle-aged soul cultivator. Furthermore, his spiritual power fluctuations vanished, to be replaced by intense, rippling soul power. As of this moment, he looked exactly like a soul cultivator. It was only at this point that he finally started to feel comfortable, and began to speed across the lands under the darkness of night. The light of the waning moon made it just possible to see the shadows cast by the boulders that littered the landscape, as well as bones of the dead. The occasional lonely soul could be seen floating through the air, and every once in a while, carrion-eating beasts would lift their heads to look around. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.